All right. So welcome, folks. My name is Rafi Santo. I'm from the Make to Learn team at Indiana University, and I'd like to welcome you all to Crafting Makerspaces for Learning. We have a fantastic panel of Yasmin Kafai, Orkan Telhan, Sherry Shi, Layla Lyons over at the end, Nicole Pinkard, and Deborah Louie. And I'll just pass it over to them to get it started for the last panel of the day. Thank you, guys.
Okay, we make it informal. Thanks for coming. So we will actually continue something which started out at the first panel where people talked about different maker spaces. So I think you have a chance in this panel to hear about a few other models. Then we'll have discussions. And I think we want to conclude in general, because all of you now had a full day of looking at maker activities, maybe even doing something on your own, and listening to, really fantastic panels to kind of reflect back on what kind of questions you might have left, what kind of issues you see, so we can take an opportunity to address this as well. And we start with the first presentation by Sherry Shi from the Lawrence Hall of Science at Berkeley. Can't really put
I can't move it any. Maybe we can switch places. Can we switch places a little bit? Sorry.
Orkan is really good at pushing buttons.
I will not be too.
Wonderful. Okay. Go to the next slide. Great. Hi, I'm Sherry Shi. I'm a research director in the Center for Technology Innovation at the Lawrence Hall of Science. And the Lawrence Hall of Science is the public science center of UC Berkeley. It's up in the Berkeley Hills and was founded in 1968. And at the hall, we have a number of public programs as well as a teen program that's been there for many years. And recently, we received funding from the IMLS MacArthur Learning Labs Initiative as well as from the Motorola Foundation to create a learning lab, which is focusing on supporting technology fluency in teens that we're calling the Tech Hive. And our particular audiences are high school students between the ages of 14 and 18. We also are attracting undergraduate mentors from the engineering school, as well as inviting members of industry and artists in residence to come build and help apprentice and mentor the teens. And we also have a secondary audience, which are our families and the public that come to the drop-in sessions as well as come to open events, which the teens then create designs and share with them. And also I feel like the third audience, which is also the facilitators that are in the space, which are very familiar with facilitating inquiry, but not necessarily facilitating a maker space. And so oftentimes the technology might be new for them. In some cases, the programming might be new. In some cases, the science, a particular area of science is new. And so we feel like we're all learners in this community space. So a little bit about our project goals. We are very interested in developing small, medium, and large engineering design challenges, as well as activities, and activity templates that we can share with the field. And so working with teens on Saturdays, we're inspired by different ideas, specific technologies that help create these challenges. We're also trying to create a studio-like environment where kids are empowered to create different things with particular constraints in place. At the Science Center, we have a particular unique bent in that we have to necessarily incorporate the public experience. So we do have a visiting public and making sure that the teens use this public audience as a way of getting feedback on their designs, as well as having the teens be teachers as well to teach families and kids and have a chance to practice communicating science to the public. As I mentioned before, they are mentored by undergraduates and professionals. We do want to emphasize that this isn't just making. I offend a lot of people when I say that, unfortunately. It's not just making, but this is really about designing. It's about reflection, iterative refinement, understanding that one could use engineering analysis and mathematics to solve certain problems, but you do have to go through an iteration cycle, and that there is a customer at the end of this, whether or not you want your product to be green, whether or not you want to improve the human potential, and different aspects of engineering. We also want to support technology fluency. So rather than show you, I have a large slide deck, as Yasmin will attest to, of our kind of scrappy space, which is an old amphitheater. But rather than go through, because I think a lot of people have seen maker spaces, that I want to kind of emphasize the core design principles, which I think might be more helpful, which is we really want to look at designing as learning. We want to support peer production, so creating projects that teens are personally interested in, that they want to work and present to other teens as an audience. We want to foster learning conversations in the process of creating. We also have an equity agenda, which stems from the Hall's mission to serve all learners and really provide equitable spaces and opportunities. And finally, as part of my other research, is trying to look at activation in science learning, is how do we ignite and support persistent engagement in science through examining curiosity, fascination, looking at their sense-making patterns, looking at persistence, their perceived autonomy within this context. So that's it for my space, and I look forward to sharing more about this.
Okay, the next person is Nicole.
Oh, I'm next.
Yeah, you want to
Okay.
come here or you want to?
It's just one slide, right? So
Yeah.
I can talk from. Hello.
Next person.
Oh, Leah. Okay, there you go.
That's me, but I have more than one slide, so.
Okay.
Here. Is this
Yes.
the main driver? Yeah. So hi, I'm Layla Lyons. I'm here today wearing my hat as the Director of Digital Learning at the New York Hall of Science, and I'll be presenting some of the work that we've been doing there, as a whole, as an institution, and then a specific NSF-funded project that I don't think my co-PI, Matthew, are you here? No, it doesn't. It looks like he had to leave to go back to Wisconsin, which you may have heard about a little bit earlier in our earlier panel today. So the Hall of Science is located in Queens, New York, and we've been very interested in the maker movement for some time now. So we've been hosting the New York Maker Faire for a couple of years running, and have made sort of an unprecedented decision to commit a large proportion of our museum space to making. So our main exhibition gallery is currently being revamped to hold what's called the Design Lab. And I'll talk a little bit about the Design Lab and some of the ethos behind that. So this is work that's being led by my colleagues Peggy Monahan and Dorothy Bennett with the strong support of our president Margaret Honey and Eric Siegel. So the main challenge that we're facing there with the Design Lab is how we can go about inculcating a making epistemology in the course of a normal visitor experience. So you have to keep in mind that visitors come to museums for a day, perhaps at most. They spend, just a few minutes at any given exhibit within an exhibition. And you can immediately see the reasons why this might be at odds with a typical maker space where, you have longevity and returning visitors. So there are two particular kinds of things that we wanted to pick out as being design goals. One of them being that we wanted to welcome and encourage divergent creative participation. So we didn't want this to be kit-based activities. We wanted people to be able to bring something of their own generative capabilities to the problem space. But at the same time, we wanted very much to support this idea of design and iterating and testing, which is so key both to engineering as a discipline and making as a subset of that. And so, some of the complications we're facing are, this notion that we have a short time frame that I mentioned. Oftentimes, visitors are lacking any kind of prerequisite skills when it comes to the manipulation of the materials that might be involved in these making activities. Many of the visitors won't return, and we've got a really diverse audience. And so, two of the solutions that we have hit upon as design solutions to this. One is sanctioned stealing. So we're in the process of designing a backbone to our exhibition that makes use of digital technologies to allow people to document what they've built and see what other people have built. And look at this as sort of a hierarchical tree, an evolutionary tree essentially of designs, so that kids can be inspired to create and add to this emerging body of knowledge within the exhibition space. And so, from some of our prototyping work, we were playing around with the idea of a shadow puppet exhibit, which seems pretty simple on the face of it. But even within the context of that activity, we were able to see ways in which visitors were learning from each other and, iterating on each other's idea spaces. So, you see on the top there, one child came up with the idea of having joints to their shadow puppet. On the bottom, another set of kids came up with the idea of cutting out holes to create, eyes and mouths and things like that. And then you can see the resulting combination of those. And so you see lots of coming together and breaking apart of design ideas. And we think that that's very interesting and a good way to engage visitors in this space. And then the second solution, so how do we approach this design, test, iterate problem in our time frame? So we talked about this earlier today. There was a activity that Peggy and Dorothy piloted called Happy Cities, which, it was a cute sort of imaginative activity where, kids would be put together in a group and asked to co-design a city. What do you want in a city? What kinds of things are necessary to you to live, in your opinion? And, it engaged the kids. They thought it was really fun. They found all sorts of ways to use LEDs, but it was sort of the use of the crafting skills themselves were orthogonal to the problem space. And so what we're doing with this new grant that Matthew and I talked about earlier, Makescape, is trying to provide a fantasy narrative context that's sensitive to the made items that these visitors are creating. So their aesthetic decisions have consequences. So in the case of the fishing hole, they're creating fishing lures out of different blinking lights, but in this case, the blinking lights have meaning because they draw different species of fish. And we're interested in experimenting with ways we can set that up as either a competitive or cooperative activity where kids can sort of brag about, how big the fish they caught was, what kinds of fish, just to see if it's a way of getting kids who wouldn't ordinarily want to play with LEDs to do so. And again, this sounds very simplistic, but we really are dealing with the ground level of engaging kids here. And then the other design space we want to play with is Happy Cities 2.0. So this is, building on that prior idea of, having kids think about what kind of a community they want, except in this case, the volume of the buildings they construct have meaning. They consume energy. They take up footprints on a cityscape. And when they place these things on a tabletop, it's responsive to them. So you can see traffic patterns change, and you can see readouts of energy consumption change. And so for this particular fantasy narrative, we see it as being much more suitable for more of a collective or collaborative kind of experience where kids are trying to work together to improve on some of these kinds of measurable outcomes. And so that's the way we're trying to support this idea of designing, testing, and iterating by giving them the kind of feedback they need in a short time frame so they can come back and redesign within, a 10 to 20 minute span.
Thank you.
I guess I'll go there. We'll just use this chair. Is there another one? It's just
That's the one I made.
You took away my other one?
There was no picture in it.
No, it was a layout of the space.
No, that was yes, in it. That's why I just put this in there.
Okay. Nice picture. So this is, hello, my name is Nicole Pinkert, and I am co-founder of Digital Youth Network and also co-founder of UMedia here in Chicago. And I am happy to be here talking about hybrid makerspaces, and actually in a position of, I think this is the 4th year of UMedia, so been in a lot of in a space of being reflective about what were some of the positives and some of the negatives and what we've done, and hopefully I can share briefly that. So this is a picture of UMedia in action, and particularly in one spot of UMedia, the sort of hangout, the messing around area. So kids are playing video games, some kids have laptops, even have some kids reading in here. When we set out to design the space, it was important for us to try to design 3 components into one space, and we were fortunate to have a very large space, 5,000 square feet, but to design a space that both had a hanging out space, messing around space, and then a performance, a geeking out space. So that kids, when they would come, would have the opportunity to sort of have some freedom about how they moved around. So one day they might just be there playing around with games, and another day they might be there actually geeking out. So what we've learned, so some of the things we've learned in looking at the space is, one is the importance that the space is not always programmed. We've had our own other spaces that every day, if a kid came on Tuesday, they were there because they were there to do a particular type of make. If they came on Wednesday, they were there for a particular type of make. But what we've experienced with UMedia by having the space that isn't always programmed allows kids the opportunity to see what's possible, things that they wouldn't think that they were actually interested in were taking place on a day that they weren't there for formal programming. And so that enabled them to have opportunities to reach out. But with that is the importance of having performance spaces such that you actually always have something being performed, something there to see. And what we've discovered in the, I would say we really tried to push on in the last 2 years, is to make sure that the performance spaces, when kids are sharing and showcasing and sharing their work, that we try to create different sets of expectations that you have to level up, if you will. If you can't perform every Wednesday if you're performing and showing the same thing. And that we have to, figuring out what are the expectations, the workshops and things that you have to attend to. How do you have to demonstrate that you're working on something and you're trying to move to a better place such that you can access some of those performance spaces? Because what we saw is that many kids really enjoyed the performance and weren't necessarily using the opportunity to develop and deepen their work. And then finally is the importance of the social aspect of it, the opportunity for kids to just, sometimes we come in and they're playing hacky sack in the middle of the floor, and that's okay. So making it a social space that they feel like is their space, which then brings them there constantly day in and day out, which opens up the opportunities for them to experience new types of opportunities to make, which end up having them make and experience different types of things. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Orkan Telhan. And I also I'm going to talk about a project that we just started in November. It's a part of a new grant between Penn School of Design, Graduate School of Education, and the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia. And we are not building a makerspace, but we are working on building a new platform, which we call e-crafting circles, where we are trying to bring together different kind of activities that we organize around the city about teaching STEM subjects using electronic textiles and printing electronics, and support those activities with an online platform so that people can continue their work after they finish their workshops. So I'll summarize a series of topics that we came across. It's a new project. And I'll just highlight a couple of things so that we can start having some conversation about how can we combine the physical making spaces with electronic learning environments so that we can think of a sustainable model of making. So ours is a very collaborative model. We are not organizing competitions to be able to foster new projects about teaching certain topics, but we are trying to organize workshops which have certain objectives that are usually tied to the cultural events in a city. Because Philadelphia is a very rich city which has a lot of local culture. It has a big famous science festival, it has a jazz festival, it has a design festival. We're trying to come up with events and activities that tie into the local culture so that we make props that support some of these, that commemorate these events. For example, we are organizing t-shirt making workshops with electronic textiles that are part of the science festival, an astronomy night part of that science festival. We try to build groups that can support themselves so that they can organize other kinds of learning activities by themselves. For example, hackerspaces and makerspaces and different institutions like the Free Library in the city, they organize their own workshops to be able to build new kinds of artifacts and new kinds of learning environments which can also be supported through this website. So the website gives them a framework to distribute material, gives them instructions, gives them templates to work with so that they can run their own learning experiences and use this as a support medium. The other element is giving, when people start building and making new things in the physical workshops, how do we really think about the moment of creation during these spaces, so they can actually, while they're learning everything together in the physical space, how they can also connect to people remotely, which cannot be part of the physical learning experience in that space. So during the creation of this artifact, how can you create a hybrid participatory design process where the remote person can also be part of the design process? And also, once the designs are finished, what happens to the afterlife of the design? Is it over? Can we really create an environment where the design process can be extended and pursued, for example, in different times, so that it can actually, so if the people who are part of a workshop has the same kind of materials, if they work on the same kind of designs, can they change, can they work on the designs together after the workshop? Can they, teach each other different types of programming exercises or different ways to augment their creations so that they can really customize everything on their own? And more importantly, how do they, if they respond to a particular cultural event in the city, how do they actually make creations, archive them, organize them, show them to each other so that the whole environment can become a feedback, give them a different kind of feedback, which can be professional feedback, could be different designers, different educators who are looking at the work and giving them some feedback so that they can keep on continuing their work afterwards. Or it could be a mutual collaborative feedback, a peer-based feedback, so that when they get together at their groups online, they can respond to each other's design and actually carry the conversation that they started in, after being in a space for a particular period of time. So ours is mostly as a design-driven activity. We try to come up with new designs that we can use as templates so that, for example, we make the basis of certain designs. We create a theme, we make a design for the astronomy night and allow people to customize their t-shirts based on a particular design so that it has a particular look and feel, so that they can, it has a customization, but it also has a certain level of quality of design that can be recognized by others, and so that the making and the design activities can actually be seen part of, in relationship to each other. So it's a new project, but it has a lot of different aspects that we are really hoping to share with you in the future. But now, for the sake of this panel, I think we can now open it up to a different conversation.
Yeah, thank you very, whoops. Thank you very much. We brought the panel together because, as you probably heard throughout the day, there are many efforts of kind of creating maker spaces and situate them in existing institutions. And for science museum and centers, this is actually a really big shift, because initially it was all about showing displays, and then we had the touching displays, interactive phase, and now we're kind of entering a new phase of kind of making things. Likewise, with libraries have been mostly about handing out books and other things, and now maker spaces enter there, and even kind of online spaces which support. And so I want to pose, the question to our panelists, as I kind of have designed and designing these spaces, what are some of the easy things and what are some of the really hard things where kind of makerspace ideology and culture has clashed with institutional culture? And also, if you can think about it, what are some of the connections to other activities or instances in those spaces? Do these maker spaces just exist in isolation, or do they connect to other activities? So who wants to go first?
I can. So UMedia is situated in the Harold Washington Library, one of the largest libraries, and it's fortunate that it's the first one. There's 4 here in Chicago, but the main one is its own youth branch, and so all the books are there. And because it is part of the library, you have a lot of flow, natural flow of people coming in to check in and out books. So you do get youth who are coming in initially, not as much anymore, who are coming in to check out books and didn't know UMedia was there, and they discover it. I think the benefit has been being in a library, and we had worked a lot in schools. You have much more freedom of what it is that you can do. They were able to change and adapt rules quickly. One of the challenges has been, particularly as we've worked over multiple years, is that a library is designed for anyone can come in. And it's okay, you know, for a child to come into the library for 3 years, check out a laptop, and never do a project. But that's okay. But from a standpoint of learning, and, you know, and we might want them to actually engage a project at some point in time. And so in that sense, the context of the library being around the culture of the library has, we've tried to figure out ways in which we can respect the culture of the library, but also put in place structures to sort of help have expectations that youth are going to, you know, if you're checking out a Mac, you know, 300 days a year, that you're actually doing, you know, a project or two besides just getting on Facebook.
That might not be functional. I'll just shout really loud. Oh, this is working, despite the light? Okay. Well, I can take a stab at this. So I know for us, there are probably more hard things than easy things because we have this, we made a decision, and you know, some can second guess us on this, but we made a decision to make a regular exhibition space be supportive of making, and that causes a lot of challenges. We do have sort of a nucleus within that called the Makerspace, though, that is hosting these sort of longer-term workshop-type activities. And one of the easy things that we found in terms of an alignment of ideology is, so we have, and I mentioned this in our earlier session, we have an extensive explainer program where we engage high school kids and college kids as, you know, basically docents, you know, so they normally would walk around the exhibition galleries and, you know, offer additional explanations of how different hands-on exhibits work or, you know, illuminating different underlying scientific concepts that might not be immediately apparent from the design of the exhibit itself. And what we've seen is this has really been revitalizing their role in the museum itself. There's just something about working with people to make things. You know, ordinarily, you know, when people are approached in museums by a docent or an explainer, there tends to be a good number of people who shy away. You know, they feel like they've been caught stealing at a store or something, I don't know. And so, you know, having a joint activity, a shared activity has really been changing the role of these young people, and so that's been fantastic for us. And then I mentioned there are many hard things. I think I'll let it to other people to talk, and I can get back to those.
The Lawrence Hall of Science was designed for 40 people when they opened, and we have 225 in the building right now. And so space is at a premium, and the only abandoned space at the hall was this old amphitheater that was made out of these huge cement walls, and it was really for lecture. There was a rotating stage with huge demonstrations and then rows and rows of computers and kind of, you know, steps up. And so, you know, I was given this space saying you could build a maker space in here, and you need and it's really set up for lecture. And so I feel like that's one of the institutional challenges is the spaces aren't moving as fast as the ideas. I think the other thing is being part of the University of California at Berkeley, which is owned by the UC Regents. We have a machine shop and exhibit developers who are part of the union. They get paid to make things. And now we have a case where we're letting kids in to cut and burn and handle tools, and so we've had to look into, you know, what does insurance mean and what is liability, and there's this whole layer of institutionalness that we have to, you know, the dance that we have to do in order to get kids the tools to do this. I think the other thing that's been very interesting is within a museum, and I had also worked at the Exploratorium as well before that, where there's a marketing and there's a brand and there's social media and there's kind of sanctioned ways of participating online, and now you're giving the voice and the brand to the kids. And so how do you say, I'm sorry, this is kind of a crummy website, but it was built by a 15-year-old, isn't this cool? And so figuring out ways of kind of branding it as the hall, but having a responsibility of kind of how do you manage that open messaging and social media creation by kids, and how do you moderate that meets, you know, the institutional vision and what the funders are expecting with this really kind of tinkering, creativity, and sometimes, you know, messages that perhaps we don't want out there as part of the institution.
Hi. So I'm actually peripherally affiliated with the e-crafting circles, and the thing that I sort of like through teaching workshops, doing e-crafting projects, I think one thing I thought was a challenge in terms of a makerspace is when you have these kids going to these spaces and making all these projects, in some ways they're so proud of like what they make, and they go home and they think of it as like their project, but it's very hard for them to see, I think most of the time when we were doing our post interviews with a lot of kids, for them to see the relationship between like what they made and brought home and like technology that's out there. And so they think of what they're doing as like a kid version of that, and they don't see that it's part of a longer trajectory of like learning to know computer science, learning how to program, and making other things down the line. And I just think like maybe that's affiliated with this problem, maybe like this kit problem, which is not really a problem, of course, but just sort of saying like this in this space, like what you're making is kind of like what you make now as a kid. But to sort of extend the thinking to think like this is actually part of a much longer trajectory of expertise and gaining sort of agency over time, and just sort of creating that line of like that trajectory and making it more clear.
Okay. I want to bring up an issue of diversity, because a lot of the maker spaces are very heavy on technology and especially computational activities, and we do know that there are very big disparities on who has access, who is participating, who has knowledge. I mean, I'm sure many of you have kind of seen the video from code.org, which kind of perpetuates a lot of those issues and also fails to mention the preparatory advantage many of those people had who had computers at their early age, private tutors, or who parents were engineers. And so I know that the mission of many maker, people who organize maker activities and spaces, is to kind of alleviate this, but museums, by definition, are very not one of the most diverse places, because the usual public who comes there tends to be, you have to bring in school buses to kind of raise diversity. So I want to kind of hear from people, because you are located in different settings, on how you think about this issue, so that in creating maker spaces, we're not just kind of replicating another kind of participation and technology divide which already exists, and kind of just make it bigger.
This is certainly very much on our mind. So I think I read somewhere that where we are in Queens is literally the most diverse area in the United States. So we get a huge number of immigrant families from literally all over the world. And it is sometimes a challenge for us to connect with them. And one thing that we're very worried about is that places like our, I mentioned the sort of nucleus of the makerspace, will be taken over by folks who might already have an entree into that world. People who already have access to privilege will come in and see it as a place to own, in a way. And so what we're trying to do is work with our neighboring schools. We have this Nice Eye Neighbors program, where we actively work through principals and teachers as a way of disseminating the kinds of opportunities that we have at the museum to encourage children from the neighborhood who might not otherwise think to come and visit us, I can't say, our exhibition has not opened yet, so I can't say how well that's going to work for this particular exhibition space, but certainly for a lot of our other exhibitions, this has been a good way of bringing in, atypical museum visitors.
I got to say, the Lawrence Hall of Science is up on a big hill, and so transportation is always an issue getting up there, and so we do attract a certain number of kids who are able to come up the hill. One thing we have been trying to do is pay our interns, and so people who are motivated can take the bus to come up, but kind of understanding that it's a very academic culture and there are particular kids that we're meeting their needs and ones that we aren't, I've been kind of conceptualizing this as, this is kind of the engine for creativity to try to create these design templates that then go out into, so we have a fleet of vans and we have an outpost, the invention lab in Vallejo, as well as trying to start one out in San Joaquin. And so thinking of the teens as sort of a crucible or an incubator for starting these design templates and then carrying these out in the community, understanding that these activities don't have to necessarily take place at the hall, but it's a place where a lot of the generation happens that then get fed back out into the community, either through our van programs or within pop-up community science areas in the community. Because I think it's unreasonable I know transportation is always an issue, and also space is an issue, so we can't serve as many of the people in the Bay Area that we'd like to. So that's how I've been kind of thinking about that equity question is, yes, we were developing it with a certain set of kids, and in order to test and refine that, we've got to put it into different communities around the Bay Area.
So this is definitely an issue that I think my work has always tried to really focus on. And I would say here in Chicago, we get parents who come down to the library to say, I need to see this place because I have my 17-year-old African-American son who's telling him he's at the library every day, and I don't believe it. I need to see it for myself. And part of how and I will honestly say when we were asked to do UMedia, that was the biggest concern of who was going to come to the library. It's the cost of transportation and things, and it's not in the neighborhood, so you actually intentionally have to come. And what we found in research and conversations with students is, one is is access to resources that they believe enable them to develop things that have social currency. And so there's a recording studio. That recording studio has social currency for them because they can create. And we've seen more and more kids now. We've done some work around fashion. Being able to come and work on fashion projects is allowing them to have social currency. So they figure out how to get there, and they're willing to show. And so so to me, it's more an issue of how do you figure out the whole ecosystem, and whatever your make project is, how are you allowing youth to see that developing this skill set or being able to produce this has an audience that they find that means something to them, and that they can see people who, and I'm not going to say just that look like them, but people who they admire. They can see that they've done this work, and they understand that there's a pathway to move to that point. So I think if you create a whole ecosystem, and oftentimes you might start with showing and creating performance spaces so that they can see it, so then they have the desire to want to do it, then you can figure out how to help get them into your spaces.
I mean, I just want to add on this. I mean, during the whole day, we really cherish the whole idea of like making for space, for making for the sake of making. Sorry. And it's a very valuable thing. It's a luxury sometimes, right? I mean, it's a first world problem. It's like we have young creative minds who have now the opportunity to have certain access to certain tools, certain skills, and certain technical abilities. And sometimes we say that just bringing these, allowing these kids to experiment or tinker on their own is really like a very valuable thing. But sometimes even when we do projects in West Philadelphia, we realize that it's really not that case. So what they create or the context of the creation is really very important. So for them, devoting a certain amount of time, which could be stolen from maybe extra hours for schoolwork or extra hours for cash, is really very valuable. So how do you fit that model into their life, and how do you make it really a valuable experience that really plays along with the realities of their life is very important. I mean, I cannot give you a formula or like a solution for this problem, but in our we are really thinking very carefully about what really we want them to make at the end. It's sometimes like lighting up LEDs is really very exciting for a 10-year-old kid. But another 10-year-old kid really may need to squint his eyes and to really try to imagine further what else that blinking LEDs may mean to him along the way.
Well, in order to wrap up the panel and also give the audience some chance, we had a fantastic day thanks to the Make to Learn people to organize this, of seeing maker activities, of hearing presentations. Are there any things, issues which you thought have not come up, any reflections you want to share? And then I want to hand it over to the audience and maybe invite you to kind of contribute. I mean, of course, we have another presentation by Dale Doherty coming up, but it's time to take stock. They want to hear the audience. Go ahead.
I know you're talking a lot about having maker spaces in libraries and museums. And what about having actual spaces in schools? I'm at the United Nations International School in New York, and we have a small little maker space. But it's a private school, and it's like you were saying about diversity, we don't get out there. So what do you hear, what do you know about schools opening up their own spaces so that then they can get the skills and then they can see, I can, combine high and low technology, I can build something, I can code, and then later on we'll do.
We've done it in the, is this on? Yeah, it's on. In the middle grades, we still put our makers type spaces in the middle grades in the schools because kids can't easily go and get on the bus and move wherever they want. In high schools, we choose to, it's better for us to work in the spaces like the library because it's, at least in Chicago, schools in, you want to get out of your school, you actually want to connect kids with more kids, and they can move around. But for the middle schools, we've done it we've put it in the schools, and it's actually worked quite well. And part of our challenge is to hand off to make sure as we work with kids as they move into high school, how to help them stay connected to the work as they find other spaces.
We have actually kind of done kind of even comparative, kind of classroom type maker activities versus after school. And one of the interesting activities is, while they are both very engaging, like creating animations, programming animations on the computer, if you kind of just look at what happens in the school space, everybody finishes a project. Whereas in a makerspace, the kind of after-school makerspace mentality, many kids start many projects, and also never finish them. And so you can kind of, this issue came up earlier, think about, on one hand, it's great to kind of show great diversity, lots of approaches, but on the other hand, we also know, and we heard this today over and over again, that there's really some benefit gained from finishing something, kind of struggling through some of the issues. And so in makerspaces, when you say, okay, anything goes, so this were kind of in comparing same group of students in these two spaces, these were kind of some of the striking differences. And I'm not saying the one is better than the other, but it raises some questions on kind of what we accomplish in each space and what that might mean.
It's funny that you should say that, just to finish, is that, coming today, I was feeling, well, maybe I don't really have a makerspace because, sorry, hi. Maybe I don't really have a makerspace because they do have to finish a project, and it does have to be somehow connected to their curriculum. It's not a space where they just come in and do what they want. There are some, and so, but it's interesting that you said that maybe it is a good thing to have to finish something.
I think these are very different mentalities, a very different ethos when you come from the DIY, kind of do-it-yourself maker versus what happens in a classroom. And I don't think these ethos kind of mesh actually very easily, in spaces like they exist. So I think as teachers or coordinators of these spaces, you have to kind of work a lot to kind of create, the connection. Okay, Azur.
While we're waiting for that next question, I wonder if I could just clarify that at least with our space, it isn't sort of you drop in, you can do whatever you want, but we usually have a project in mind on a particular theme, either an idea, a tool, or a process that we want to give them, and that helps constrain the space for working on something.
So along with that, because I know Nicole talked about don't always have the space with a program in mind. And as I'm moving forward to work on putting a makerspace in Harold, Washington, that's one of the concerns that a lot of people have. Well, what are the programs? What programs? And I think if it is a true makerspace, there needs to be a time where people can just sort of come in and work on what they want and maybe get ideas off of other people. Certainly, we don't have the space or the ability to have people just sort of hanging out there, like with YOUmedia with the teens, because we're going to be more of an adult space and teen space. But I guess I'm wondering if you can speak to that issue. Maybe, Nicole, what you've found, and it sounds like you have some things that you have specific themes. So just your thoughts on that.
Right. What I was going to say is one of the challenges is if we have everyone follow their passions, it really taxes the facilitator, right, to know everything from soldering to programming to routing to sewing, like everything, to understanding nanotechnology and how ferrofluids work, just the full range. And so, and I find that training the facilitators, having a great facilitator is absolutely important. They have to be genuine, they have to be warm, they have to be willing to make food, because teenagers get hungry all the time. And so we put a lot on them, and so part of the program is also structured around who is in there that has expertise. So if I have someone who is a filmmaker, and I know that, or he's a puppeteer, I know that that's where we're going to do something with puppets, because I know that person's going to be in the space. And so from a pragmatic standpoint, if you're going to train up a bunch of volunteers that are always going to be in that space to address whatever they need, and also kids get very frustrated when they're like, they don't know. I was like, what do you mean you don't know? Aren't you supposed to here to help me? And so kind of minimizing that frustration is important.
So I'll use a sports analogy, and if you want to get better at sport, I like to play basketball. You can't always be playing the game. Sometimes you have to be at the court watching, and you learn a lot by watching other people. But if you feel that the only time you come to the court is to play, then there's a lot of learning that's not going to happen. So how do you create spaces where you still can get people there, but maybe if you have limited equipment, it's not your day to have to use X equipment. You can still be in the space and communication, looking to see what's happening, interacting, communicating, and collaborating, but you might not be driving the ship at that time. We are fortunate in the UMedia space downtown to have enough space that you can have a full-blown program going on and someone over here playing video games, but I think you can still take some of the spirit and bring that in. And I think it's important for youth and anyone to understand that it is important to also just to take in and connect and watch, which is actually going to, and reflect, which is going to help you when you get to the point of where you're actually producing.
Was it?
So this is kind of related to your question. I wonder, as far as like, it sounds like all of you are kind of like jumping in full force, full makerspace, and I'm Liz Neal, I'm from the Art Institute of Chicago, and thinking like in terms of starting small, like trying things, and if any of you have thought about that, and I'm also thinking in terms of there's a lot of different places going on. So if maybe we have a specialty, and the MSI has a specialty, and UMedia has a specialty, and how spaces kind of work together but still have their own kind of flavor, because obviously we would look at it from a different angle than you would look at it or anything. So I wonder if any of you have experienced things like that or have opinions.
Well, we're trying to do this in Philadelphia because we have so many different community organizations as well as schools participating, and it turns out to be a really interesting logistical activity, because each kind of organization has its own schedule and calendar on how they organize things, and they're not synced at all. And where the kind of, a lot of nonprofits kind of live from one funding cycle to another. I mean, well, that's probably true for schools nowadays too. But I mean, so it has been a really interesting experience to kind of figure out on how you can get kind of people who are in schools and want to kind of participate in maker activities, to people who kind of are part of a hackery, a Fab Lab activity, and do also sometimes things for money, which is, I think an elephant nobody has talked about what's kind of happening in the maker movement. I mean, the Fab Lab have a lot of commercial interest too, whereas a lot of us do things kind of, for free because we have funding and we're trying to reach particular kind of populations. So I don't have, a solution to it. It's just an observation from the last 2 years of kind of trying to bring together different groups and figuring out ways on how we can create connection in a very fractured city. And I think that's not just true for Philadelphia, but for many other urban cities as well.
Can I go? One thing I was going to say is that there's this idea from IDEO about plussing, which is like adding to an idea rather than critiquing it. And one thing that we found, this is a very small experiment we just started doing, is holding Google Hangouts. And so between different museums and and maker spaces is to have the facilitators do a Google Hangout, and somebody takes a turn presenting and sharing what they did and how it went with the public. And sharing those practices and reflecting around that and recording the Google session has been really helpful. And so it's less about the public audience of, your expertise is this, but you share what you do best, and then everybody kind of learns from that, and you take turns doing that. But Google Hangout and open source tools, that's sort of, because we're also very poor. I mean, we're a rich university, but we're poor with the program. And so, whatever we can get for free is really important.
I just wanted to add just one logistical thing, point. Just as Orkan mentioned, because we did so many of our workshops around the city, the one thing that was uniting us is these physical events. So for example, we collaborate with this one group that has a Halloween ball, and we had a bunch of kids make masks. So even if people are coming from different areas, and for the astronomy night, if they're making T-shirts and they're in different organizations, the thing that actually unites them is we use the city's cultural events and public spaces to sort of create moments of synergy. So, I mean, to sort of think about independent units and then other points throughout the calendar, throughout the year, and in the city as like maybe those nodes where things can come together. I think that's useful.
And I think here in Chicago, I mean, in a mile, the number of organizations that are doing programming that are already in some sense trying to connect together. I think we have, unlike most other places, really the opportunity to try to make it work. And one of the things is, and I think it's built on what the point you just made, is the events. I mean, hosting events, performance spaces for kids where it's tailored to what is the natural performance that makes sense at your location, that gets kids in the door. So at the library, we might have 150 kids come every Wednesday to listen to poetry. Only, 20 of them are going to perform, but they're there for the social event, and then some kids end up coming back. And so how do we begin to think of what are those natural performance spaces that, that make sense for the Art Museum, sense for the Museum of Science and Industry, Chicago Architectural Foundation? Because kids want, one of the biggest lessons that's come from UMedia is that they want a place to be, and they don't want to just hang out at the mall. And if we provide them spaces where they can connect, and we sort of help them figure out what the hooks and triggers are into ways to engage, then you'll see them begin to take it up. So I think we have low-hanging fruit here in Chicago, and I think the Hive has put in place opportunities for that to happen, and we just now need to sort of seize the opportunity and make it happen.
Yep, go ahead.
Hi, I'm actually a public school educator and a superintendent from Central Virginia. And one of the reasons I'm here is because we have been invested for a number of years in fighting the tide of public education in the United States. So, we think that it's going in the wrong direction, has been, and we basically are trying to not pay attention to that. But here's what I would say about the question about should there be makerspaces in schools? Absolutely. How do makerspaces fit with the idea of projects versus kids making? I think there has to be room for both. Project-based learning, for me, is when kids are engaging in something that they are likely going to take to completion as part of curriculum. But making for the sake of making is also a really important part of what our curriculum should be. And I'll tell you why I feel that way, and I'd be interested in your thinking on this. That in the real world, whether it's a writer, a musician, a poet, it doesn't matter, an inventor, an engineer, we all have lots of things that are either in the works that we've abandoned, and that the process of actually abandoning projects is a learning experience. And so one of the things that I would expect to see as we're building out, and have been for 2 years, maker spaces across our system, and we're actually affiliated with Maker Corps starting this summer. We're one of the groups that are going to be affiliated with that. I don't care whether kids finish every project, because I think there are takeaways that are very much a part of process and not product. And that what, for me, we will get from maker spaces is the opportunity for kids to have a lot of choices about things that they're interested in, their passions. I think curriculum can give them that, but I think being able to move on things and realize this doesn't count in the way that a project-based learning project does is really critical. So I'm interested in, if there are other educators in the audience that are out in public schools, what the thinking is about how to have this fit and integrate with the bigger picture of our work with curriculum.
Well, I have one comment I would like to make. I loved your way of casting your role, fighting the tide of American education. So one of the things that we've been doing is we've been doing the formative work for developing our exhibition spaces. We've also been doing a lot of formative work on how to create teacher programs. So how can we convert, that one day your bus comes in, your bus leaves visit into something that the teachers can carry forward in their own making spaces, however narrow or wide they might be in their home institutions. And one thing we've noticed with this, which has just been tremendous, is of course the kids enjoy it, but the teachers have been transformed by this, and not in necessarily the ways you'd expect. One of the things that we've noticed most is the way their opinion of their students' abilities have changed. By seeing them outside of their normal context, outside of the normal context of assessment and performance that you see in schools, they recognize capabilities in their students that they would never have seen before. And some of the lowest performing, quote unquote, academic students have seen, and it's a shame that we still go back to these academic measures, but their grades have improved tremendously, not just because they're inspired to work, but because the way the teacher responds to them and their interests has also changed. And that's just tremendous, and we hope we can keep that going.
I just want to add on that. I mean, unlike the more organizational educational models in the making world, you know, there's no clear distinction between who's an expert, who's a novice, right? The teachers are sometimes the people who just took 2 workshops and they're a little far ahead in the game because they learned a little bit more in advance and they're a little older than their students or the people that they're facilitating with. So there's a mutual learning experience in every workshop. So people are, especially when you're talking about craft, which is always about it always improves when you do it, when you do more of it, when you do it more stubbornly, and you know when you continue what you started with. It's a mutual learning experience where where they persist together and they work on the same problems. So the next time when the teacher starts a new workshop, it carries over the work that the teaching experience that was accumulated from the previous one. So I think we can never talk about a very homogeneous maker space. We'll be having different cultures of making spaces along the way, which will be more ad hoc. Some of them will be more sequential, iterative, and scaffolding. But at the end, I think the one thing that will be clear is that it's not going to be like the expert-novice typical relationship that we will have in a school setup, where the person who's teaching the material will be excelled in this same material for 10 years or 20 years.
So to the one point, our work in the middle schools, we try to do it's a hybrid model in that we view digital literacy as a literacy that all the kids need to have. And so in some sense, we needed a compulsory piece where all kids are going to have a base set of literacy, which for us was important from a school standpoint such that the core teachers could then build on top of it. You know, we wanted to say we taught Scratch, so now you can use Scratch as in your science class because you know all your kids, at least 80% of your kids can build a Scratch game. And that enabled us then in the after school to have more of what we think of like the maker space, the passion driven. I'm there because I want to be. But now I've touched it in the school day, and schools can rely on it. But then in the after school, it enabled the more passion, which then as teachers would see what kids would create in the after school space, that would drive them more and more to begin to integrate it into the school space. But the compulsory, the first couple of years without the compulsory, the literacy class that everyone had to take it was hard to integrate it into the school space because you needed those maverick teachers who were going to be willing to actually, learn it to do the teaching of it.
Last question.
My question ties into what you just mentioned. And first of all, you are a rock star superintendent, and we need more superintendents like you. So they're out there. So thank you. So my question relates to this, and I was very happy to hear this is the first time I've heard all day anyone say project-based learning, and that's really what my question is. I'm an architect, and I knew at age 5 that I wanted to be an architect, partially because I grew up in Chicago and I have family and culture and people who surrounded me who supported that. I also was a product of private school where project-based learning was really the foundation of my education. I was very lucky in that my mom worked at the university, so I was able to go there for free. Now that I'm a parent and I have a second and third grader and I can't afford $20,000 a year to send my second grader to school, I am the self-appointed thorn in my superintendent's side trying to get the push back to project-based learning and the social and emotional learning portion of Makerspace is not just the physical capabilities of making. I mean, there's so much more. As a child, knowing that I wanted to be an architect, I was a maker before I knew what a maker was. I just thought it was being a kid, and that doesn't really happen anymore. So my question is, how much of what you are doing is documented, shared, open source, as far as the curriculum basis for people like me who are trying to push my suburban school boards and superintendent and teachers back to this focus of project-based learning?
So it's all
long-winded question.
It's all available. I think we could do a much better job of making it accessible in that sense. So it's available off of our website, but we can make it more available. I mean, one of the fortunate things about the funding we received is that was part of the deal. Anything we created should be accessible and available. So I think there's that, but there's also structures for professional development for mentors and teachers and things like that that we can say here's the content, but we can also say let's help you figure out how to implement it.
Yeah, we will, in a month, the website will move from beta into a more public stage, and then we will actually put all the shopping lists, all the PowerPoint, videos, all the materials which we used for instructor workshops as well as from the workshops, make them accessible so that people can reuse them and repurpose and remix them, to their own liking.
I completely sympathize with that. I mean, project-based learning is really the key to really scaffold a certain kind of knowledge. You can start, like the architecture education builds on it, like in a couple of years, so that at the end it advances towards a certain professionalism. But again, when we were saying that we are supporting different institutions with different nature, an organization that organize a workshop to this, which is a hackerspace, is different than a science museum. It's very different than a library. So the projects that they can facilitate will be very much tied to the nature of their work, their own expertise. So our role is to really make all of this available so that they can remix. The people who want to get this material can mix and match based on their own needs. But the important thing is that you have to seed certain projects so that so that people can leverage on that. But making people do a T-shirt that shows constellations for an astronomy night can be a very valuable scientific project for a 10-year-old child, but it may not be the best project for a free library who has less investment on that scientific topic. So we're trying to, we are geared towards teaching STEM subjects, but we're also sympathetic towards different institutions' capabilities or their own investments in their own communities.
I was just going to say, I think the devil's going to be in the assessment. And so if I can imagine a school goes to the trouble of spending all this money creating a makerspace and test scores go down, I think it's out the window, right? Unless you figure out a compelling way to measure PBL that you can necessarily map to the resources that are spent. This is really, really tricky. I think this is why a lot of people do makerspaces in school after school time, right? It could take place at school, but it shifts the whole nature of it, and I think it'd be the social emotional development, my son goes to a private alternative school, and it is really around that emphasis, and it's less around the let's grade about the STEM learning. And his peers that are in public school are being judged against their SAT-9 scores every year, and looking at where that goes and how fast and how far.
We can. Okay, well, I want to thank our panelists, Layla Lyons, Sherry Shih, Nicole Pinkert, Deb Louie, Orkan Talan, and the great audience. Let's have a great talk later with Dale Doherty. Thanks.